in other places, and deeply concerned with medicine, with all the things that we would consider, I mean, as part of a scientific, rational civilization.
So where...
I mean, even when you're reading the commentaries, for instance, these are treatises, and they're so concerned with rationality that sometimes there's always the objector, Chet. The objector puts the question to and sometimes if the objector doesn't have the argument, the person who's making the argument supplies it. So that the rationality of the thought is never disturbed. So I feel that yeah, I can understand some of your frustration, but like I can also feel a lot of sympathy for where the other kind of frustration comes from.
So how do we work through that frustration? I mean, in the sense, what to you would be the best way to approach the past so that the past does not become, as you've talked about in the book, turned into just a slogan, you know?
Approach it with the mind. Approach it as a thing for intellectual discovery. It's not something that you have to invent. In other places, the Indian past is studied like that. It is studied. It's not studied to prove that, oh, the Aryans came from here, or to prove, to basically, you don't make articles of faith out of the past. But you study it as a thing. I mean, this is a country like we talked about. We talk about, you know, this is the country with IITs and IIMs, but there aren't institutes of classical studies. India is not a center of Indian learning. I think that that's the way to approach it, to make those things, and the rest will come. Because if you produce a generation of people who are serious in that way, they will influence the kind of things that are published. They will influence. They could potentially, I think. There's no question that there was a moment when colonial education needed to be rethought. It's just never been rethought. It's just been left intact. So you'll have a girl in a slum reading Virginia Woolf, and you think, well, what good is that for her? You know, and isn't there something absurd in that exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I've always maintained that about daffodils and why we read words. It's one of the earliest poems we read in school, and many of us will never see a daffodil, ever.
I have a young cousin, and she's full of the glamour of Spanish and Italian. She wants to like spend time learning Greek and Latin. You bring her anything, she even gets a whiff of India, and there's such a strong aversion. It's full of kind of piety and a kind of localism. It's déclassé for her.
But do you see the guts out there to embrace that kind of study of India that you're talking about, where you're looking just for knowledge and not necessarily looking for answers to certain preconceived ideas of India that you might have? We're looking for knowledge, not propaganda.
Maybe not, but I definitely feel that as I'm traveling in India, well, if you ask me the question, do Indians feel, especially Indians entering a modern scenario, do they feel a certain pain at the kind of cultural loss that's occurred? Yes, I think a lot of people do. It comes out in crude and more sophisticated ways, but I really feel that it is, that the lack is real. And obviously, a lot is decided on how a country negotiates that. You know, if it goes the way of propaganda, it won't go very far. It'll fall on its face after a while. And you must also remember that the desire for propaganda, the impulse to make your past a particular way, doesn't come from you. It's other people you're trying to please. The fact that you feel small is because other people who were not part of your past made you feel small for things that they value and that you don't necessarily value. So if you change the frame, if you end up doing tremendous violence to the past.
And you end up with, and there's a very memorable line in the book where somebody is describing the latest Gandhi generations, and I noted it. It's really harsh on the Nehru Gandhis, the current incarnation of it. It says, because it's the closest thing we have to our own homemade foreign Scotch whiskey bottled in India. But do you think that generation that it represents, are you are you like hopeless about it? Because and I will read a little bit out of
Okay.
the book from
Lovely.
you,
Yeah.
where they're talking about this, they're thinking that this generation, he thinks, this last little trace of colonial education in India, they're not so bad after all. They're on their way out now, and when they're gone, no one will remember in the world opening up of collagen lips and blue glass malls that there were once these people. These women who, drunk and anger and bitter about life, could nonetheless, from the depths of some quieter India where afternoons were longer and reading deeper, throw a little Henry James your way on a cold December night as easily as someone passing over a bowl of peanuts. And do you really think there's no worth in that? That doesn't really is of no consequence to modern India?
No, I would say that India turning away from any aspect of its past is a bad thing, and I don't think that of course I don't think that generation was completely without worth, but the truth, it would also be true to say that if we were to look at my grandparents' generation and then that generation and then our generation, the maximum amount of cultural loss occurred in that middle generation. That was where the people of our grandparents' generation could speak like Persian, Arabic, Hindi, Urdu, and they had a PhD in English. This is my grandfather, but everyone else, mutatis mutandis, in other parts of the country, it was like I said before, it was an embarrassment of riches where language and culture, Indians were kind of magnificently bilingual, culturally bilingual. And that sudden immersion of public school education and convent education, and then these people who could come out and only could speak servant Hindi and who knew nothing about their past in any way, they weren't even in some ways animated by, they couldn't even imagine the shape of it. That is a tremendous amount of cultural loss happens right there at that point in history.
And how is that generation then still, with that deracination, able to occupy the position of the elite in India and hold on to power? Is it like sheer inertia?
Well, you can feel the pressure. You can feel the vulnerability of their position. And naturally, if you create a country in which people are politically free but economically unfree, so that there isn't ever that middle class, there isn't the people who are more immersed in their culture don't have any economic power, and then suddenly over the last 20 years or 25 years, they've begun to have that. You can see how quickly that transformation would have occurred even then. I mean, the fact that these people remain the way they were is because of the stagnancy that, knowingly or unknowingly, they left this country to deal with.
So now do you in fact see with the new government that's in place that there is a new elite that is forming that is not as impotent or deracinated, or in the words of this book, an effeminized elite that was there?
Well,
and where does Arun Jaitley fit into that?
What makes me happy what makes me hopeful in India is that you don't, the way of revolution, of in some ways like violent rupture, it doesn't seem like if India's democracy holds and if a certain kind of discourse is not interrupted and people are able to form a new consensus in an organic way, then you don't necessarily have to imagine a situation where one bunch of people are like violently booted out and another people come and inherit it could happen in a more seamless way. I can't imagine that it's not going to have like a certain tension. But if the system can absorb that tension, then it doesn't have to disrupt the life of the country.
But do you think this new consensus that you are saying that might emerge, would that have a room for both a Toby and a Mani Raja? Would a Skanda feel comfortable in it?
I think there would have to be, the people on the other side would have to walk a little bit of the cultural distance too, and they don't necessarily show a willingness to do that. But if they would, I think it is possible that there would be room for that kind of thing.
Would it have room for someone like you?
I think probably a little bit more on the margin, but yes.
Yeah. Because I mean,
I feel like you're saying this because you think there's quite a lot of pushback against me,
no,
probably,
I
no?
feel like I'm saying this because I feel like many of the things you say earn you anger from all sides, which is not, I'm saying is not that it's not a good position to be in. Sometimes when, if both sides criticize you, it means you might be saying something that is truthful.
Right.
But in the current scenario, from the various camps out there, I mean, you don't have enormous sympathy with some of the VHP type organizations who are trying to create slogans and pamphlets and sparse, or the Smriti Irani is trying to sort of shoehorn a kind of Sanskrit, but you don't have sympathy with the sort of standard bearers of the culture and the left that who've already been out there. So I imagine that it makes you a somewhat lonely figure.
I'm fine with that loneliness. I mean, as long as somebody doesn't shut me down, you know, and that, I think that would matter for the kind of place. I mean, if that happened, if India took that turn and people were shut down and people were put out of business, then it would be a very scary thing.
I have no idea how we are doing on time because I'm not exactly sure when we started. So, and I can't see anybody through this stuff, but I wanted to know, should we be start opening it up for questions now, or?
Probably, I think.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking a long time.
I know. So
There's a
I think there's a
question.
hand, there's several hands up there. So is there somebody with a mic who?
I think we've been abandoned by the festival.
We've been, but Queen Victoria will look after us, as she always does, even if you lambaste some of her descendants.
I see plenty of hands, so that's good.
A very good evening. So we just heard how India accepts, or even the modern world accepts anything that's scientific. But Sanskrit and Hindi are supposed to be some of the most scientific languages that we do have. But today's modern India is not taking to it. So, sir, why do you think does that dichotomy exist? Because I personally want to learn Sanskrit, but every time I want to do that, I'm told that what use will it be for you? Which makes me feel very sad.
Right. Well, I think that probably because what you know is not widely enough known, and a number of other things like that associated with Sanskrit, whether it's to do with the history of the language, whether it's, and just the fact that, you know, this connection of Sanskrit with liturgy and religion, it's a false connection because firstly, the literature of Sanskrit contains much more than liturgical texts, and Sanskrit itself was, the Sanskrit thinkers were always very clear. This is Kavya, this is Shastra, this is the Ved. Even this thing of Vivakshu, which is the idea of agency. It's the desiderative of the word vach, which is like vocer and vocal. It's the word to speak, and vivakshu is the desire to speak, which is the idea of agency. What do you intend to say? And the Veda was described one way, as not in fact having an agent, and then Itihas was described as where there was a gap between Shabda and Artha. There was, with the rishis, when the rishis spoke, word and meaning were exact. And then with Kavya, there was a gap between word and meaning, and that was the area of play. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the Sanskritic thinkers were very easily able to separate what was secular, what was... And so the fact that in modern India, this is suddenly all acquainted with some kind of religious obscurantism, it's an absurd reading of the past.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And there's a line in the book where you say we use words like secularism. I shouldn't say you say, your characters say. We use words like secularism to make people feel small about their culture.
I think it was used like that. Perhaps not with the same violence that it was used like that in Turkey, but certainly, and in the world of this novel, secularism was used to basically say, don't bring your culture to the table. Keep it at home, you know? And I can understand if there's a feeling of affront.
Can I go?
Sure, if you use the mic so people, there's a mic right there.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presence here in this literary meet. Basically, we need a person like you, I think. I have a very ardent question. I have not yet come across your literature or literary enterprise, but I have a very ardent question in my mind. When you are trying to excavate, if I'm properly use this particular word, the ancient past or distant past of India, there is a very prominent and plausible presence, one prominent plausible presence. If you culture the whole history of India, from the very beginning to this period, that is a dharma. That's dharma. It's not religion. It's not. I'm talking about Hindu religion. I'm talking Sanatan dharma. It exists. It is a basis of humanity, basis of our humanistic presence in this world. So I would like to ask you, what is your point of view regarding our Sanatan dharma?
Very nice question. You know, I agree with you. I think that the